Okay, so let's start with somebody who joins us. So, welcome. I'm Nancy Hirsch, and I am an artist. And my work is at an intersection of personal narrative, which is a lot of art making and community engagement. So I've been trained with Delaware Humanities to be a facilitator of conversation, which just is a perfect fit. So what I'd like us to do is just go around the room, and then I'm just going to add that I am not from Delaware. And tonight's overarching is through the lens of stories and history, and how that really shapes our identity, our connection to a place through our stories and history. So why don't we just go around the room, and we'll introduce ourselves, and I'd like to hear if you're from Delaware, and if you're not, where you're from, and if you are, how long you've worked, how long you've been here. Would you like to start?
Darlene Hockessin. I'm from Hockessin Historical Society, and I'm from Michigan, and I've been here years.
Thanks, Darlene.
I'm Mara Hendrickson, and not only am I from Delaware, but I went to University of Delaware, but both my parents are from Delaware. So when I started at DuPont in 1995, all these transplanted people are like, "You're from Delaware?" I'm like, "And my parents." What? And even a couple grand.
Wow.
Interesting. Okay. I'm Elizabeth Higginbotham. I'm a native New Yorker. And I was thinking about this question about what is my neighborhood. Because I moved to Cool Springs in Wilmington in '98. And then, and that felt like community, and I was even on the committee reviewing what to do with the reservoir when they drained it and what was going to be on top for 3 years of meetings. Now I live in the riverfront, but when I was selling my house, I mean, there are people on the street that I got to know, particularly around what to do with the reservoir and our hatred of Ursuline Academy that really wanted the space to be used for a parking lot for their girls. Crazy. And I said, you know, you're a gated school. But now I live in the riverfront because when I moved in the pandemic, it's been very hard to build community because our exercise room was even shut down, and then when they opened it up, only one person could be in at a time. So I'm really not sure, but when I was moving out of the neighborhood, I had a corner house. A lot of people came by and said, you know, "Oh, you've always had this really nice garden," and it's just like, well, why didn't you talk to me the 20 years I lived here? So it's this strange I don't know, I'm a transplant, but it's a strange kind of community. And now I'm over there with people who downsized in this apartment building and people who are starting their careers. So there's a lot of people moving through, and then those of us who are there. So I don't know what my name is.
A Delawarean. So my name is Danielle Leverage. I'm in Delaware Humanities as their community programs officer. So you'll see me at a lot of events, and I hope to see you guys at a lot of events. I'm from the Seaford Laurel area. I grew up there, went to high school there. Had lived in Wilmington for about 5 years, then joined the Peace Corps. And then when I came back, had lived in Wilmington a little bit more, but I just moved back to Laurel in September. So that's where I'll be going after this long drive. But I'm all about that sort of that anti-brain drain concept of, you know, you have folks in rural communities that might not have access to tools. If you go get trained somewhere else, you go to University of Delaware, which I did, or go somewhere else, please bring them back to your communities. Don't leave them sort of in that cycle. So I'm glad to be back and talking to people and being from the rural space again.
Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah.
And I'll get on camera. I think, is that one turned on?
Yes.
Are we ready? Yeah. So I think mine's on also. But Pete Seeley with the Hockessin Historical Society, and Darlene and I are both volunteers. So all the work we do is to try to preserve and share the history of Hockessin. And all the nearby community historical interest also. So it's very interesting because we're trying to partner with the library to try to have the old historic photos and documentation preserved because the stuff is lost. And if we're not preserving it, nobody is. and it goes on to other family generations that then toss it in the trash. So I brought a few historic photos of just my property that are not archived or anything, and if they're not shared or saved, then that'll just be lost for future generations. So having the documentation that goes along with all of these historic artifacts is important. So we have the Hockessin Historic Museum over at Tweeds Park, and we're trying to preserve and save those kinds of artifacts and history that are relevant to our local area. And it's one of the few places that we can actually share that kind of history and preserve it. But we have issues with resources. So there's things that I always recognize these hangers up in the room, and that's one of the really simple things we need is these like actual
These
mounting
hand
devices for mounting pictures. Something so simple, and we don't have them where we can change up displays over time. So I have to go to my pickup truck and actually get my notepad and everything, and I'll be right back.
Sure.
But yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I'll be back in like 2 minutes.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks.
Oh, take my time. Thanks, Darlene.
Don't rush.
We've been emailing like every day for the I didn't get an email today yet, Darlene.
Yeah, you did. You just didn't notice.
Well, thank you. So the goals for this evening is for us just to really have a rich, juicy conversation and be present for each other, because I love that some of us have met before, some of us haven't. And sometimes it's a wonderful opportunity to talk to people that you wouldn't usually talk to. And I invite you to bring compassion over judgment when we hear other people's stories or perspective on things, and curiosity over fear. Because sometimes when we kind of come with a place of we know what we know, maybe old things kind of could. So this is just a place for us to have a really rich conversation. And so
So
just
Nancy, I didn't hear, I know you're not from Delaware, but where were you? And I know you lived in Hawaii, and
I grew
where
up
were
in
you
New
born
Jersey.
now? New Jersey,
Oh.
okay,
Thank
maybe
for
you
asking.
said that.
Yes, I grew up in New
But I'm like,
Jersey.
Michigan,
and-
New York, and, okay.
And I have been here about 14 years. My husband took a job in Delaware. And
What does he do?
he is in sales, and he works for a company that does building automations. So when you walk into a building, the lights get dim and the temperature adjusts to your body, or it doesn't. That's his business
Wow.
on the commercial level.
Uh-huh.
And so it's interesting because when we moved here, well, maybe we'll say this part first, stories about. So we have an agenda. It's pretty loose for a small group, but I did reach out to some artists I know, and there's some photos, and there's some writing, and I think some interesting ways of looking at Delaware and people from Delaware and our stories connected to a place. So we're a small enough group, and I was going to have us break into partners, but I think that if we just shared a story about and I'm going to jump in. I'm going to start. Usually I'm going to sit in the back for a lot of this, but I'm going to just start because this will, as somebody that grew up in New Jersey, Delaware was someplace you just drove through.
Oh, my God.
And then, interestingly enough, when we were moving here, and people advised us, oh, you don't want to send your kids to school in Delaware. You'll have to send them to private school. That was also interesting. And
And what year did you move?
14 years ago.
Okay.
And so there's a couple interesting things about that. So my kids were educated in Pennsylvania. And, because that's where we ended up finding a house that we liked. It wasn't like intentional. But the interesting thing about that is I recently stepped down from a role as executive director for the Delaware Institute for the Arts and Education. So the past 5+ years, I've had a lot of, I've gained a lot more knowledge about education and the quality of education and your zip code and where you live and the type of education you get. So it's been really enlightening. But I love living around here. I hike in White Clay all the time. And I've met amazing people, yoga, and when I did the training with Danielle, we were looking at images, and Danielle just had this wealth of knowledge. So, and one aspect of working for the DIAE was that we serve schools throughout the state. So I could see not only the schools, but the opportunities if you lived in one part of Delaware compared to another part of Wilmington compared to another part of Wilmington. If you lived in one part of Rehoboth versus, driving around. So I don't think Delaware is unique in that, but it was really blatantly interesting, especially the education, because my kids were educated in public schools in New Jersey, and it wasn't anything I never considered sending my kids to private school. The only kids I knew who went to private school they went to Catholic school, because it was their family's religious choice. So that's my connection. So do you want to share a story about Delaware and kind of what you've noticed? And it could be anything. Maybe it's a place you feel connected to, or...
I'm thinking, maybe we'll go on to the next.
Okay, sure. We can circle back.
Yeah.
I'm always full of stories.
Good.
Well, one thing, when I first came in, I kind of saw a little more about what this is about. I do know Nancy through yoga, and I'm glad she invited me here tonight. And now that I see I wish I had invited a particular neighbor to come with me. But something jumped out at, Elizabeth, something you said about living in Wilmington and not having people reach out to you. I've heard young people say that. So I met my husband very young, and I was married very young, so I wasn't as much into the search. I've had my sister, my cousin, my best friend, all moved to Philadelphia for a short time because they felt like Delaware was very cliquey, and they had a hard time post-college years in their 20s making community in Wilmington. And it sounded almost exactly what you said, being, an adult, a more advanced adult than somebody in their 20s. Anyway, that was just an interesting aside. The story I was thinking of is a connection to Hockessin. I grew up in North Wilmington, but when my daughter was writing a paper, and she went to Callaway. She found out about the Shirley Beulah. Now it's been celebrated, and it's a little more. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Brown versus Board of Education case, and that was 7 court cases that was brought to the Supreme Court. And it was, like, the name of it was Brown versus Board of Topeka. But the only case of those 7, it chills when I think about it, that set the precedent was Shirley Beulah from Hockessin, right where we live, in our backyard, because they won. That judge, ruled in favor of the family. And that's why Brown versus Board happened the way it did in 1954, I believe. And just to hear that happened here, my daughter knew about it, and then, like, it was the serendipity, a neighbor of mine, who is on the board in Delaware to make the Beulah residence a national park, because Delaware is also the only state in the 50 that doesn't have a national park system, so they're making the, so if any of the, I could give background knowledge, I don't want to take too much time from other people, but so just literally this neighbor a few doors down was working with Senator Coons and the governor and all this stuff. So Helena wrote a paper about that last year for Delaware History Day and won a prize. And let me talk to Helena. So, and then because of COVID, they didn't have the big grand opening they expected. But the last 2 years, there was a school march for the local middle school, and I had a daughter each year march in that march to celebrate it. So I feel very connected to that. And a pride that Delaware had a part in Brown versus Board, which is just a huge, case in the Supreme Court. So,
And that was the only case that had been the affirmative, that they had
yes,
won
the
all
only
the other
case
cases.
out of any of those cases that came.
Yeah.
So because of that precedent, that's why the Supreme Court could rule in favor
They
of
pulled it all together.
desegregating schools. Yes. So I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, I could go on and on and on about No, that. that's but, wonderful. Thank you.
But it's
Yeah.
really cool, and that's why when I'm seeing these pictures and stuff, I'm like,
Oh, I wish I brought one that Edwards with me. Like she, and going forward, that she's a great resource. And, but, I don't know. That's a Delaware story that I'm connected to, and rather recently, in the last 4 to 5 years, and I've been here my whole life. So.
And the Beulah marker is on hold right now. It was approved. We got funding also through our local.
Let it go first. And then we'll get to you, Pete.
Oh, come on, I'm just giving a little feedback on the Bula.
A little Bula
family on
I just have to put a little feedback on that, but it's on hold right now. It was approved, and we had the funding for it, but they, the person who was doing the historic marker coordinator, they got a new job, so they don't have a historic marker coordinator right now at present. So they said all the historic markers in Delaware are on hold. So we're waiting for that new person to come in, and we're pretty much set though. I think we're pretty much going to be guaranteed that historic marker to complete the whole loop there. Yeah, so that'll be an interesting thing.
It's good and it can educate people.
That's right.
People just know about Brown, they don't know about all the implications.
And Delaware students aren't taught that. You know,
No.
they aren't taught about the Shirley Bulu connection, which is right here in Hockessin.
That's pretty incredible. That is
It is,
pretty incredible.
it is,
Thank
it
you
is.
both, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Did you decide what you wanted to say?
No, I'm gonna wait a little more.
Stories,
you.
stories. It's interesting because when I was moving to Delaware, I moved here from Tennessee. I taught in Memphis, Tennessee for a long time, and people said, "Is that in New Jersey?" Growing up in New York, I knew where Delaware was, but it was just amazing the way in which people don't learn geography anymore. But it was, for me, I have taught for a long time and taught in institutions where I was first generation of my family to go to college, and I've taught in places where that's been a bulk of the student population. So coming to teach at the University of Delaware was a shock because so many of the students were raised middle class. And also, they don't want to talk about race. And they also don't want to talk about class.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
You know, and that's right. And so it was like, what is this place?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I taught a course on poverty, and I had a student who literally said, I grew up in a normal family.
Okay.
Okay, what does that mean? But to her, it was a white middle-class family, but she couldn't say that. She could just say normal. So a lot of my time here has been working with people to talk about race, and talk about class, and talk about gender, and access to different things. So that's my, you know, and it is not in New Jersey.
Well, even when I travel in Europe or even, you know, I remember being in Hawaii and saying to someone, where are you from? I say, you're Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And if they're curious
Mm-hmm.
and ask where, then I'll say, well, it's Delaware, we're right outside of Philadelphia. Oh, yeah, well, and Joe Biden helps now.
Yeah, Joe
Like,
Biden
people
helps
would
a
say,
lot.
oh, yeah, you know. But,
Visibility.
but see, my thing was always near Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So my family has been here for almost 300 years.
That's
And I have so many family stories to share, and I have a few pictures that I'd like to also show you over on the table. I went to a printing company and had them, you know, enlarged just a few days ago. But it's remarkable how it went from a farming community to just being residential, and it was like 1990s that all the farms went to being residential. And there's so many stories that are left behind, that are just not shared and told and preserved. So that's something that we're trying to work on in the future with the Historical Society, is preserving those memories going on. So I mean, I could go over so many, but my grandmother went to the Lamborn Library when it was the first public school. She went there as a student. So, you know, the 107C schoolroom, their dedication ceremony is tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning.
Really?
So that's and I think all the the county executive is going to be there, and I think the governor also tomorrow. So that's tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. So I don't know if they're standing room only or how crowded it's going to be, but that was part of the whole history, and the Quakers that settled the area really helped out with educating all of the public. So they were involved with the 107C school building, and then also the Lamborn Library. So we're involved with preserving that building as it is. But so I have a few pictures of actually my great-grandparents maybe, with my grandmother also in the same property. So you can see the changes over the years of the building. But it's just incredible. And Hockessin has such it's just a strange place. It's right on the border between, Philadelphia and Wilmington, and it was almost nothing in the past, and then it became this, little enclave still. So it's still a very, small community, and it's very tight-knit, and it's, our past president really loved it because it has this community feel, where everybody can kind of get along and talk with each other, and, it doesn't have that city, feel to it. It's very personal. But, and the word Hockessin, if you're not familiar with where the word Hockessin came from, a lot of people think that it's an Indian word, and
I assumed it was a lemon box.
look at Indian,
Yeah.
an Indian word. So the property that I'm working on was called Occasion, and they think like Whisper Down the Lane that the town Hockessin came from the word occasion, and it wasn't until it got brought up as the Quaker Meeting House right up on the hill, right up on Old Wilmington, that it then became a town. So there was no town Hockessin back in the day. Yet there was a Native American encampment right across the street. So right across 41, there were Native Americans living here. So when the Europeans came and started settling this area, there were Indians living in tents and teepees. And they were saying, like, what are these people doing, building these houses here, and settling off, what's our property limits? And they had no boundaries, they didn't have the same kind of lifestyle.
Wow.
So those histories are all pretty interesting, and there's so many. So as the Historical Society, we're trying to preserve and share them with the public. So I could take up 2 hours. I could take up the whole 2 hours.
So,
What do we have till 8 o'clock?
So what I would say is, what I'm gonna do is, I do want to kind of stick with the agenda, so I'm gonna get my phone just so I have a sense of time,
Sure.
but,
I'll be fast.
oh, you have a phone, okay, good.
What do we have? 2 hours, or is it
Yeah,
only 1 hour?
Hour.
Oh, I saw 6 to 8 on the agenda.
That's okay.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
Okay?
Darlene always tells me to keep. Yeah, she's like, stop talking.
Okay.
You can skip me if you.
Just, you're from Delaware, I love it, you're from Delaware.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I'm really connected to down south in lower Delaware is like crabs. I don't know if anyone likes to eat crabs, but that's just like a family thing. We used to have crab feast every 4th of July, like it was just a thing. Anyone that like dated someone who wasn't from Delaware would always be like, have you had crabs? Let me show you the mustard inside. Like, it was just a whole thing. So, I mean, I love crabs. I love that like Delaware has that connection to the Eastern Shore. And I found out recently, well, my grandmother had passed in June, and I found out through going through some of her collections and materials that Laurel, Delaware was the #1 distributor of crab baskets, like on Delmarva, which is such a weird thing to think.
That's very cool, because
Yeah.
Maryland takes all the crap.
I know.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if I ever had a Delaware crab.
It's just the baskets. It's not the crab like distributions, but like the actual.
Oh, the baskets?
Yeah, the bushel baskets.
Oh, interesting.
And so people use them for like decor. If you've ever seen, they do like pendant lights and those kinds of things. So yeah, small town famous.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
When I was in 4th grade, this was in Michigan, we learned about Thomas Garrett.
Oh, yeah.
Now, most people do not know about Thomas Garrett. And I know this because I've taught over 20 years here in Delaware. And I've spoken to many people. Well, when we moved here, my husband and my kids and all, we moved here, and I was really surprised that I started teaching, and people would not, like children, would not get the Black history education. So, and that was because the teachers did not know about it. They just plain did not know about it. We learned about Little Black Sambo, and you know Little Black Sambo. Little Black Sambo used to run around a tree, and he was nearly naked, and it was just the most embarrassing thing you've that are seeing, and they said, this is Black history, Little Black Sample. So I was really happy to move to Delaware and find that they don't talk about Little Black Sample. They don't talk about Thomas Garrett either. Thomas Garrett was very successful in helping 2,700 slaves move on to freedom. He sent them first of all to Philadelphia, where they met William Still, and then they moved on to Canada, usually. So I was really happy. When I moved here to Hockessin, I was really surprised that the people here in Hockessin did not know. They did not know about slavery, and they certainly didn't know that this was a path of the Underground Railroad, that people actually came through here. And the reason they came through here is because freedom was only just a little bit up the road. So that's my special connection to Hockessin, is that I came in and helped people to see that, there was a lot of, there was over 30 abolitionists here in Hockessin, and they helped the slaves. One of them is right across the street. It's James C. Jackson. He lives in that huge yellow house. It
Supposed to say that name, I don't know.
it would be right across the street over there. And James C. Jackson, you have to I don't want to lecture about Underground Railroad, so we'll just go on. Maybe I'll say something a little later.
Yeah, I mean, I would love, we don't, I don't know what time the library closes, but we can stay, because I'd love to see your photos, and I'd love to hear more, and,
Have you been to Garrett, Tubman Park on the waterfront?
Yeah.
There are many, many, many events there.
Yeah.
It's a special place.
Yeah.
so,
We just have our first Underground Railroad location listed with the National Park Service, and it's actually a station on the Underground Railroad. And I won't say it's my house because it is, but yeah. So it was
that's pretty incredible, wow.
Jacob Heald House, and it's right behind the Jackson property, which is right on 41. So there are a whole bunch of Quakers who are responsible for helping people get to freedom. And just like Darlene's saying, it's right on the border. So we're right there between freedom and slavery. So these places need to be recognized. But if you go into the Park Service's website, you can actually look at a map and zoom in, and you can see that we're the only location now listed in this part of Delaware. So it's creating that trail from Wilmington up through into Pennsylvania. So Wilmington has a few locations, and Pennsylvania has quite a bunch, but there's no connection between there yet. So yeah, and it's a matter of a 20-page long report, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, filling out a whole lot of check marks. Is it open to the public? Is it not? And filling in dates and things.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, really, I had no idea, so I'm really glad that you're both here, so thank you. When I was thinking about putting together some material for this, Daniel and I had shared some images. I know a lot of different artists, and there was an exhibition in Wilmington with Hank Willis Thomas. I don't know if you saw that. So in your pamphlet are some photos, and I invite you to spend a few minutes, like 5 minutes, just looking, and just see if there's one that resonates with you for whatever reason. Maybe it brings up a story for you, or you're curious about it, and then we'll discuss it. Okay, so look through the photos, and I'm going to get my phone just so I can be mindful of our time. And I would say when you're ready, just look up. And you can keep the packets, and there's some information and links.
So this is one of a, what, a 4-part series?
This is part 3 of a
Four-part series.
conversation. So it's not required that anyone goes to any other given
But
conversation.
they're all a little different.
Yeah, so this is
Sorry.
our Stories and
Okay.
Histories section. In November, we had our health and environment conversation in Brandywine 100 Library. And then we had a media and democracy conversation led by a friend of the Lenape tribe in Dover. And then there's this one, and then Saturday's community and culture, that'll be through 9.
Who's that? Do you know who the Lenape is?
Ruth Ann Purchase, you may know her.
No.
by chance.
Okay.
I could connect you.
Absolutely,
Very
please.
active in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also one of our
Thank you.
facilitators, Nancy.
Did you see the J.S. Pajama exhibit? J.S. Pajama?
Yeah, which one? In New York? In Philadelphia? In Philadelphia? Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, yeah. It was incredible.
I heard it was great. Someone educated me of that, and I heard it was great.
Yes. I did. And they have some of his work in their permanent collection too. So we'll show. So was there a photo that you would like to kind of just share a couple minutes what you noticed and what got
This is this from a park? Because I thought it was,
Well, I can tell you I know about the photo after, but just kind of what about it appeals to you, or what stories does it bring up, or memories, or...
I just thought it was interesting, but not as interesting as this. Oh my God, I'll never forget that. People are still talking about January 6th. And I was interested. I don't remember his name, but I do remember the whole situation behind that, yeah.
And that man is from Delaware. Oh. That particular man, Kevin Siegfried, is from Delaware.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It happens to be in Laurel, Delaware, so we're just not.
Oh, you must be embarrassed.
But I mean, I don't want
No, I mean, I think that, well, so you remember that day. You want to talk about that photo a little bit? I mean, what do you notice in the photo? What's going on? I mean, where is it taking place?
He's carrying, this is the White House, and he's carrying a flag.
Yeah, the Capitol.
Capitol, yeah. He's carrying a flag from a Confederate flag, and I was just real surprised.
I
to see
ended up
this
watching
whole
that
thing. Go
live.
ahead.
I ended up watching it live because I was just watching the validation of the votes and those kinds of things. So just, yeah, it just how it happened so suddenly. It felt to me, and I don't want to say this, but I was young when 9/11 happened, but it felt like that. It felt like an urgency, and I was texting people I was working with, and I was like, what do you do? Like in an emergency, like in an insurrection, and it's just the cultural ramifications of this photo. Even before knowing people from my hometown, it was just scary.
I called my sister, she lives in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I said, did you see this on TV? And she says, child, we've got both TVs on. You know, we can't believe what's going on.
It's amazing that they weren't able to secure a building like that should have been secured already, and then the millions of dollars that are spent afterwards to put up the fences and everything. Afterwards, you know, in the wake of that kind of thing, you know, that all that money was spent on securing something that should have been done, I think, in advance.
But it's also that people had a cultural understanding that this was sacred, and that it isn't going to be stormed. That says something about the shared vision of spaces. you know? And that's, I mean, this is the capital. It's everybody's capital, you know?
And what's interesting now is, things were, when we were kids, you could go down to the Capitol and take a tour. I don't know if you can do that anymore.
I remember close to when I moved, and I had friends who were visiting, and they'd never been, one of them had never been to Philadelphia. We could stand in front of the Liberty Bell and have our picture taken.
I think of certain things like that, like every time I go to the airport and I have to take off my shoes, I curse that bomb. Like, talk about changing things, or you're right, that this is a shared institution,
Yeah.
and
I mean, there's the master narrative, and I critique it all the time, but there are still some things I believe, these shared beliefs,
I think for all of those things that happen in our society, that it shouldn't limit our freedoms also. And it shouldn't make us uneasy to go out of the house. And schools are really, I think that's the biggest thing also with that, is these buildings need to be secured and protected. But then there's the limit where, what do you do between public and private, and how do you keep those buildings safe? But, what are your rights? Yeah.
But part of what happened that day, it wasn't that it wasn't secure. And I don't want to turn up the heat in you. I look at these pictures, I see it, I was so over, I covered it up. Like, it's almost like you're denied, like, it makes me sick. Like, I didn't know he was from Delaware. And I'm just like, ugh, like, where I still wish it didn't happen. I couldn't believe when it was happening. Like, I was in actually YTT, I come home, and I'm like, said to my husband, I'm like, do you see what's happening? And what it felt like to me was slow. It kept happening. When there was 9/11, which is very different, very violent, but we saw people rush in, and we saw the firefighters rush back towards. It was so slow, and excuse me for saying this, but I was like, that was a black mob. I believe the National Guard would have been there, just like other places where people collect. I just felt a fury, and it kept going, and it looked like they were wandering, and they were taking pictures, and still at 6:30 at night,
Nothing is happening.
nothing. I mean, I was just here. I felt rage because I take a lot at night. My daughters and I are kind of these nerdy history buffs, and we toured in places there. Choruses, we went to Europe and Germany, and you go to palaces there and stuff. And I left because I'm like, we love these palaces and cathedrals in Europe. And here we don't have, part of the beauty of America is there isn't royalty. Like, we elect her, that's why we're here. It's our shared history as Americans. But when you go to the Capitol, that's the symbol of all that. And when we had a German orchestra come play with our kids, the Wilmington Children's Chorus, we brought them, we put them on buses and brought them to DC and took them for a tour of the Capitol. And it's just, and it's funny because as like part of our history is World War II, and we're with a bunch of German students, and we're like, I wonder how this will be, displayed. I had a different feeling in history back in 2017 when that, but when I saw it happening in this place, that it is to me like almost, not religious, but
Just sacred
part of
space
it's
in
sacred
some way.
space,
Yeah.
yes. And it felt like a violation, and a slow, drawn-out violation, like almost like pinpricks all over, as opposed to just.
I want to talk about this
Sure.
from the.
Yeah, not everybody has the same one.
So
So there was like 6 different Hank Willis tops. So if you could describe yours to us. In other words, they have. Do you guys have? Oh,
It
you
should
are.
be the
Oh, it's in the
art.
art. Never mind, it's in the art. Thank
Oh,
you.
we've got the big picture.
Okay, gotcha.
I
Okay.
didn't know that after Martin Luther King's assassination, that Wilmington was occupied for 9 months. I did not know that until I moved here. And I was shocked. And the scars from that are still divisive in the community. But it was like, because I was in 68, I was in New York, you know, when the assassination happened, and we didn't have a big thing, but it was, you know, just getting through that spring and summer was horrible, and it was like you could just pick people up off the sidewalk at the end, you know, with King, Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy. I mean, it was just shattering that these institutions that, you know, you believed in, you could assassinate people so readily. But I had no idea that, you know, the occupation lasted longer in Wilmington than it did in Memphis, Tennessee. Mm-hmm.
So interestingly enough, there is a poem in here that I want us to get to, because talking about sacred. But Ashley, S.K. Davis, is somebody that I worked with at DIAE, and so she was commissioned to do a piece for 1968. And so Ashley is, now I think she's going to turn 40 this coming March, young black woman. Her mother was the first black woman admitted to the Delaware bar. So we were talking about a very educated young woman. She had no idea. So this is in Delaware, and she did not know that. So you talk about what's taught in schools.
Black history.
Right,
Yeah.
black history. It's, you know, and we,
Well, it seems lazy, like it's always the same thing. It's not, you know,
Yeah.
George Washington
What is
Farmer.
omitted?
You know, it's kind of like the top three, you know, but it's not as layered as what's right in our backyard. You know,
I don't know if
top
you're aware, our local middle school, they got grant funding for school field trips, and they went to a trampoline park. So, yeah, that's what the teachers wanted to do. So, you know, it was too much work to go to a cultural exhibit or some kind of a museum. So they took the kids to a trampoline park. And so those are the kinds of things that are being, you know,
Push.
yeah, pushed and educated. You know, it's easier. I guess they get a little physical fitness out of it. But
But you're right. I mean, I grew up in New York and went to the Museum of the City of New York.
and Noah, Nona, there's so many museums up there.
The Museum of the City of New York. And now it's a very dynamic museum telling lots of different stories. But when I was in the 4th grade, it was all about New Amsterdam and that the colonial stuff. But we went to other museums. I took students to London, 3 different trips, study abroad in the summer. And to many of them, it was church, school, and sports. So I'm taking them to museums, and they don't go to museums in the area. They don't go to plays. They're more likely to go to football games.
That's right. Yeah.
You know. But it was like, huh? The school, I mean, because the schools in New York, when I was coming through, made sure we were familiar with these cultural institutions in New York. That we had theater, that we got tickets to go to the theater, that we went to matinees, you know, and it just is a real failure. And I don't know if it's about the vision or one of the things I think is really important, and having done a lot of faculty development, faculty just don't know.
I think there needs to be a whole revamp of the school system. That we're almost teaching back to like 1900s style school, but then the teachers don't want to teach it. They're doing just computer aided stuff, and yeah, the teachers don't touch chalk and write up programs. You know, it's all done on a computer program. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that they don't want to
Want to.
teach. I think they're there to teach. I've had with 4 kids over a decade, you know, just seeing all the, my kids have gone to Catholic school and public school and charter school. Like, we kind of have a little sampling in the area. But it is funny because I think because families, there are more working 2-parent families or even kids with their grandparents, because, you know, all sorts of families, maybe they're not
I agree, like, you don't see the families going to the museum, so that's what's great about the schools.
Yes, that's
Lifting
what,
that up.
that's right.
And I felt like that's the only way I ever got anywhere, because I love to chaperone, because I went to the Constitution Center 4 times with each of my kids, and then when my son went to college in Philly, my husband had never been there. So I said, after we move him in,
His turn.
I'm taking you to the Constitution Center, that's another amazing place. But, you know, not to, but it
Yeah.
is funny, and my kids are a little weird, because we will go to
Mhm.
a concert, and like just last, that they finished singing with the Wilmington Children's Chorus, and I'm like, we're allowed to have Christmas concert, we're going into Wilmington, you know, and
Yeah.
yeah, they're a little nerdy, and it's okay,
No,
you know.
That's the other thing, what's normal anymore? Hey.
So she did the flags color.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I'd like to read that
Okay.
together, not, because I think that our conversation has been at a good place, and I definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I do really love her writing. So I would ask us to go around, and there's, I would say, Darlene, if you want to start, and maybe read, I know the first, let me see where I put it, hold on.
It just has flags at the top.
It says flags. Flags. And maybe you could read the first 3
I don't know
sentences.
if I have that.
It's in there.
It's in here? Yeah, I see it.
Yay.
Oh, say, can you see,
Yeah, yeah.
can you see, I have a complicated relationship with your flag. I had a collection of flags when I was little. My daddy would travel a lot for work, and whenever he went away somewhere different, he would bring back a flag from that country or state. Spain, Canada, France, Sweden, Puerto Rico, Texas, Delaware. As soon as he'd get home, I'd study those little rectangular fabric squares with the colors and special symbols. They were beautiful. I wanted to wrap myself in everything that they represent.
But your flag, listen, I always knew that the Confederate flag was a warning. The bright stripes on a venomous snake alerting me to beware. To be caught in that intersection of that X, I knew to be caught in the crosshairs of a gun, and I knew not to get caught up like that. I knew that band of allies were not allies of mine. I digress. I'm not talking about that flag.
Listen. Your flag. I know all the history. 13 stripes for the 13 colonies. White for purity and innocence. The red is bravery and valor. But I remember reading somewhere that red was for the blood. Lots of blood. So much blood. Have you ever noticed how sometimes the red on your flag bleeds into the white? And stars? Blue skies and white stars? This first one's for Delaware. A field of blue for perseverance, diligence, and justice.
But somehow, your flag also was a danger. Somehow, your flag also was a warning sign to me. On the back of a truck or in a window, posted prominently on the shoulder, showing me. It tells me, watch out. It tells me to take care. It tells me that person, that patriot, might not think that I'm supposed to be here, and I am supposed to be here. Or maybe I'm not supposed to be here, but nonetheless, here I am.
That flag in your window, that flag on your back, that flag inked into your skin makes me wonder and question and worry. The hair on my arms raise and the back of my neck tenses. I'm at alert. My ears, my eyes hear everything, see everything, because I just need to make sure that I'm safe around you and your flag.
It's a very powerful poem. Very good. And it just says something, because just like stamps, we're interested in different stamps. We used to get mail of countries that had, colorful stamps and different kinds of things. It doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe email needs to come with a stamp. But flags, you know, you got them and they were, oh, look at this, and then this flag is trouble.
Has it always felt that way to people? I only know my own personal story, you know, and the American flag is something I loved as a kid. I loved 4th of July, and it didn't really feel, and then after 9/11, it was, I had the magnet on my car, and I had the one flag in the car, and I'm like, they tear apart. It's really a bad idea to hang a flag from a moving car, you know, so I took that down, but I had the magnet, and I always just felt kind of that feeling with the Capitol, like this is something shared. And maybe that's privilege, not knowing that it could be threatening. That never occurred to me until...
The Confederate flag or the...
No, the American flag. Oh my gosh, no. That was...
I think
But I think the American flag didn't, but it's funny because, you know, it started feeling more threatening to me in, you know, the last, I don't want to pick a date, but let's say, about 2016. But, I mean, it started, but I would see it on the back of the truck, and I'd feel an aversion on that, you know, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's my flag too. I used to love that flag. But it's funny. I feel a little more averse than I did, and I'm wondering if that, I only know my story and my lens, but I'm wondering if this poem, I don't know when it was
Well, I
written.
think your interpretation is telling all by itself, because I think Elizabeth and I kind of were thinking, the poem's about the Confederate flag. It talks about the X and the cross.
Well, the first paragraph,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
second.
But I think that's such a like valuable takeaway to feel like the American flag can sometimes be synonymous with threatening. And I don't want to monopolize any kind of conversation, but my experience in the Peace Corps like also tells me like the American flag is not respected. It's not a symbol of hope everywhere. It is the symbol of colonization. Like it's not a good time for everybody. So that's just.
This is just like the poem, and I forgot her name. It wasn't really a poem, it was an article. It was called My Body is a Monument. Elizabeth, really think about them. I know you know that. The article, My Body is a Monument. I think her last name was Jones. She teaches at a university.
Nikki's somebody? No.
Nikki Giovanni?
No, she's more young, she's a lot younger. Yeah, than
A different
Nikki
generation.
was.
Yeah.
And she talked all about, you don't have to go around talking about monuments, because my body is a monument. She's very life-reflective. And she says, you can look at me and tell, like, my people were born in Africa, but when they came over here, there was such rape going on that all of a sudden I came out looking like this. It was very powerful. Oh.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I really do think a lot of the controversy that's brought up more recently is because of the media and these smaller events that really don't amount to much are really brought to light and portrayed differently than they are, and it's more of a controversy than it needs to be. And in this area, we're so peaceful. I mean, there's nothing that happens in Hockessin. I think catalytic converter thefts are the biggest thing. So people's cars get broken into, and I think it was in the library too, your parking lot, where somebody's catalytic converter got stolen. But it's as peaceful as can be. People don't get shot here and mugged, and we don't have the crime that they do in big cities. And even Wilmington, they talk about the shootings that happen all the time, and it's like it's nothing like Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, it really, considering the scheme of things and how many people are in the United States, it's really not as big of a deal as the media makes it out to be. So I think we actually have a very safe society compared to many other countries where they don't report crimes. So there's other places where, they don't have the freedoms that we do, and they don't have the security and safety that we do. So I think.
I was going to say, I think this poem is kind of all about perception now.
Yeah.
And she does start talking about the Confederate flag, but she isn't clearly talking about the American flag. And I know that when I see that flag on the back of the truck, and it's the American flag, I feel like a symbol that was shared, though it was problematic, has been hijacked.
Yeah, and it's interesting because
And that's my perception, yeah.
it's really after 9/11, because I had friends who were in Europe when 9/11 happened, and when they came back to Pittsburgh, they couldn't believe all the American flags. They were everywhere, all over the place.
And stores were profiting off of that.
Yes.
Yeah, like
When
I
did this
think
happen?
Home Depot, the whole front of the stores, was American flags. They couldn't sell enough American flags. Yeah, people became patriotic all of a sudden, just to support to jump on the bandwagon. I think if anything.
Yeah, but it's like, there are other things you could do, to support the people for whom this happened.
Right.
Well, I think remember that people matter more than the flag, and I think that's where some of this
Yeah.
lopsided division that's been more in the country, in the last decade. You can dance around with the flag, but then you gotta take care of your vets, and
Yeah.
give them,
Yeah.
pay for their medical. And that's happening more now in the last year, which
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for. And it's not sexy, and you don't hear it in the media, that, oh, these kids are victims that were vets that were in these burn pits. They're getting their benefits finally, and it was, like I said, it's not sexy. He was talking about that, but
John Stewart.
yeah, that's true. He's a good one. I really like him. But, so I'm not happy that like I said, I'll look at it and I used to love it, but now I see it, I'm like, kind of like, oh, do I feel safe around
I think that's insightful.
person there?
Like, I think that's very
Yeah, it has been telling.
it is 7 o'clock.
Yeah, no,
So we have one more hour then.
Yeah.
Well, what I would say is, I'd like us to look at your photos. Maybe we could just, I feel like we have this nice pad. I just want to write something on the pad. I want to write something on the pad, that nice Sharpie. So what might be a word that comes to your mind, just a takeaway from the evening, something that you heard, or some sort of story that maybe you heard from somebody else that got you thinking? I saw you taking notes, Maura, or if there's something else that comes to mind, a word or a phrase?
Guess I feel excited. It's more of a phrase. Excited to learn more. So,
That's perfect.
yeah. So Hank Willis Thomas is new to me. Hearing about the Jacob Field House is new. Learning about James C. Jackson from Darlene, that's new. So,
Perfect.
excited
That's
to
wonderful.
use these resources going forward.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I learned more about Hockessin.
Yeah.
And, some things I knew, but then this is.
That's an interesting problem that we have in this area, is that there's all this rich history, and it's not being shared, and it's not being shared properly. So we need to get people more in tune with all these historic things that are going on. That's our job going on in the future.
Good.
Actually, I think that's really key. Just kind of piggybacking on what you said about the media, because the media seems to focus on one type or one lens, one angle.
And negativity. It's all the negative stuff, and it's not the real historic or the important things that are going on in a community. And the mainstream media would have an hour-long news segment, and the last 5 minutes would be that one positive thing. They're like, okay, we're going to do the shootings and all the car accidents and everybody who got killed. And then, oh yeah, for the last 5 minutes, it's like, oh yeah, something really positive happened today.
I
And
wrote this down.
in reality, yeah, it's like there was so much more positive stuff that happened, and then you're focusing on that really negative small bit of information. But that's what sells, I guess.
And I think that's why these conversations are so important, because we learn so much from each other, and Laura, like I love that you shared about what kind of the flag meant to you growing up, and you recognized and said, but that may not be yours, and looking at other people in the room, that may not be your experience with the flag.
I gotta say, one thing that struck me was, Elizabeth, when you had said, like, the Capitol was a shared sacred space, and I had never thought of it that way before, and I've been involved in, like, federal programs, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, but, like, the idea of, like, that was really a shared sacred. And I think across aisles and ideologies and those kinds of things, it was, like you said, like an unspoken, like accepted fact. And I was just like, wow.
And I think that's something to maybe to think moving forward. Maybe this is a takeaway question for us to think about. Where else do we have shared sacred spaces?
The library.
I absolutely agree. I think libraries are amazing. And I think that more and more communities are recognizing that.
And I love
I
the
love
way that libraries have changed over time. When I was a child, we had to be quiet. But when I was in Memphis, I could see that libraries were the daycare centers, so that the noise level went up. And then they started to just make different spaces for different groups. This is for the young people, these are the teenagers, these are the older people. I mean, and it is really, it's shared purposefully, recognizing the needs of different people. Yeah, I like that.
You know what, I think
And
this
then
is,
I go with it.
I think this is a great question to lead with. And I also invite everyone to think about what makes something a shared sacred space.
That's a good one.
So just kind of put this up here and we'll just tack this in.
And I want to look at some of his pictures.
So yeah, I'll share them real quick with all of you.
Yes, I want to see them.
Before I
Where'd they go?
Oh, I guess you can't share them, then we.
Did they disappear? Where'd they go?
They were right on the table.
Were they right?
Oh,
Oh, over here. Okay, yeah, I left them over here.
How did Darlene hide them? And she never left her chair.
Thank you,
She's a magician.
I like that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really powerful questions. Thank you, everybody.
Did you?
But yeah, so Hockessin, this is what Hockessin used to be.
First of all, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for printing
This was easy. Oh, you know what? Pass them around.
Yeah, I gotta
So-
say, that is a white kid on a tractor.
So
From earlier.
That's what all of Hockessin used to look like. And here they were holding hands.
And what were
Do you
people
want to just
growing?
pass these around?
What's that? Excuse me?
What were people farming?
Oh, that was corn for the cows. So
Okay.
it was a dairy farm.
Okay.
So it was all feed corn, and that was basically the entire farm.
And this
And-
is your relatives then in the pictures? Is this
So
your-
actually, they were not my relatives. They were the tenant farmers that were there. But this was my great grandparents, and this is my grandmother. And it's the same house, the same location. But that was what Hockessin was. So basically Quaker farmers, and
Now, were there black, because there's a black community, by the soccer field, like how long have blacks been in Hockessin?
so it wasn't until more recently, so maybe like the late
Thanks for
1800s.
that.
My grandmother remembered having a black housekeeper, I think, that they had paid.
But I got it.
So there were also slaves in Hockessin. So the Tweed's Tavern that we now own had a black slave that was working there in the kitchen. But a lot of the area where there were Quakers,
Yeah.
a lot of the Quakers did not believe in slavery, so there were no slaves on the Quaker like farms. So it was mostly family farms. But we're uncovering more and more, and as we undig those histories, we try to share them with everybody.
Well, I'm so glad, first of all, thank you everybody for coming. This was really wonderful. And I just love that, I love that I learned that there's a Hockessin Historical Society. And I've learned so much, so, yeah.
And we try to be open and involved, and it's amazing because we're trying to get more involved with the public, and over time.
Do you have a
Sure.
website and all that stuff?
Absolutely. So I have
Facebook page and all that stuff?
I have membership forms, and I have little pens over there too.
Okay.
So we have a website, and take a pen, they're free. But we have a website on there also. So please feel free to take a look.
I'm so glad to learn that.
And I have business cards, but I forgot them. They're on my truck.
That's right, I'm quite
Business cards right here.
Yeah, Darlene has a few.
Give
Oh,
you one.
good job, Darlene.
I'll take them just to put our chairs somewhere.
Yeah, so we're just gonna stack them along the wall
Oh.
here. I think your camera's still running.
Oh yeah, that's so long. I'll turn it off. I'll take care of
Okay,
it. Thank you.
no, here, sorry. We have story time in the morning. Some of them can just
Thank you,
go up
Congratulations, this was super fun.
It's really fancy. It's really, really expensive. 45
This is where we mark stuff. Oh, and the whiteboard as well.
Oh, thank you.
Sure thing.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you also.
Well, this was
Yep.
super fun.
But it is healed.
It was a great conversation.
So the farm was the
Oh, thank
Cox
you.
Phillips Mitchell plantation, and Jacob Heald was the abolitionist at the time. So for that one significant aspect of it, they listed him as the owner. So that was him during the time that he was the abolitionist. And I went back and forth with them, and I was arguing over what to call it. And I said, you know, people know it as this one name, and they said, well, he's the significant person, so name it after him. And I'm like,
You guys are
yeah.
interested.
Well,
If it gets us approved.
And it's also the positive spin of the abolitionists.
You know,
You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. And there's very little documentation on that because you know they weren't writing all that kind of stuff down and documenting that they were helping people get their freedom.
Right now it's at Harrington Historical.
Laura, thank you so much for
Zoning
coming. It was
exhibit
great
for
having you.
Historical
And
Society.
it was fun.
Grants.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just like, oh, I love to brought Lynette, and it's
Oh,
fun.
wait, wait.
Lynette Edwards,
Okay,
Dr.
great.
Edwards, she ran for a community executive, but she is an educator in the area, and.
Who's can I give a pen to? Who wants a pen?
I don't know, thank you.
It's a black pen. I tried to get blue and they wouldn't give me blue. They said they only have black, so.
Okay.
It's free.
I'm very stiff.
First official facilitator.
So yeah, thank you for doing this program. It was great. It's awesome.
So, yeah, I was trained in
September.
September, you guys were my first group.
Hey.
Oh, did you want them stacked or just next